Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Children should not be victims of war. They should be off limits.
Since October 2023, the United Nations estimates that 25,000 children have been injured in Israel's war on Gaza. And the World Health Organization estimates that approximately 2,500 children in Gaza require urgent medical attention outside the territory. I want to know what it takes to help children evacuated from Gaza start their journey to healing. I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know, a safe space where we go all in on stories about women. So by the end of each episode, you can say, now I know. Dr Lisa Thornton is a pediatric rehabilitation specialist treating children evacuated from Gaza. She's seen firsthand the battle these children face long after leaving the war zone. So, Dr. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us on Now You Know.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've been working with children for over 30 years, and you were based in Chicago. You were practicing in Chicago as well. And now you're in Qatar, working for Sidra Hospital, rehabilitating children from Gaza. When Israel started attacking Gaza, and you saw the lack of healthcare these children on the ground were getting, what was going through your mind?
Well, I think, like any physician, when we see the kind of devastation that we were seeing on television, you just knew that this was such a disaster that was being created, an artificial disaster, not a natural disaster. Yeah. And we knew there were children there that were under the rubble of those buildings and that needed help. But as a physician sitting in another country, you're really very helpless to do much other than, try to give positive feedback to your colleagues who are there. So as an independent physician, of course, I was compassionate, but there wasn't a lot I could do as an individual.
Hospital is your place of work. You saw hospitals being targeted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we were losing colleagues. Colleagues and their families were being killed on a daily basis. Well, listen, buildings can be rebuilt. How many doctors have been murdered? How many nurses, therapists, healthcare workers have been killed? Senselessly, pointlessly, Yeah, it's devastating that they're targeting hospitals. Hospitals should just be off limits. Children should be off limits. Children should be off limits. And they are taking the brunt of this. They are the most affected in war. It is irrational. It is immoral. It is unthinkable. It's wrong for whatever rationale you try to give it. It's wrong. Children should not be victims of war. They should be off limits.
Can you tell me about the first children that arrived in your hospital and what that was like for you to treat them?
Well, we didn't know what to expect, I had never seen war trauma. So, the first few rooms that you walk into and the children are fully bandaged, multiple amputations, half an arm, half a hand. They might have these external metal devices that are used to hold fractures together, multiple fractures, multiple wounds. I mean, it was just so much trauma in one little body, Usually, we see multiple trauma, but I don't know, this was somehow even more severe. Children who had been trapped under buildings for days and had been extricated and then airlifted to us. So, my first impression was one of complete horror that this was happening to children. I don't know why somehow news is, even though you see news and you see what's happening, it's still sanitized. You don't really see the reality of what's happening. But when you see in just stark relief, in granular detail, what's really happening, what war really is, it was really, really horrible. I mean, there would be times when I'd have to just leave the room for a minute and collect myself and go back in. You have to, I just needed to give myself grace as well, because it's such a horrible thing. And there's a part of me that's grateful that I can feel that deeply, that I wasn't just like, oh, well, another child, oh, well, you can't be a robot, so it's so horrible that what your emotions are what they are. So I would leave the room, collect myself, go back in, process with my colleagues. We would talk a lot about things so that we could try to not be so traumatized by what we were seeing as well. All of us were horror-stricken, but at least we had each other to talk to, and that's how we managed to process all of this. But it was devastating. It was horrible. I mean, because it just starts with, as a physician, the first thing you do when you go into the room is you take what's called a history. And a history is basically, how did you get here? What happened to you? And so there would be always one family member and one child. Typically, in the beginning, it was always the child who was injured and a guardian or parent. And these people would tell us the story of 26 family members dead. We're the only 2 survivors. All of this child's family is gone. 15 family members dead. We're the only 2 survivors. This was a typical story. It was not unusual. It wasn't, oh, all the survivors are back in Gaza. No, it was, we got this child out and everybody else is gone. So it was devastating to be in the room with these families and to hear their stories and to understand the gravity of what was really happening there, and to see these children who had been blown apart. They're just blown apart. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable. And I'm from Chicago. We have crime in Chicago. We have guns in Chicago. I have seen lots of trauma, whether it's car crashes or gunshot wounds or falls from buildings. I've seen all that. I couldn't imagine that this was done intentionally. It was inexplicable to me. I would leave the room and wonder, what was accomplished by blowing up this child? It was a very difficult time. Lots of lost sleep, and really, in some ways, almost feeling bad for feeling so bad because of what they had been through. I'm here safe in Qatar. They're experiencing this. This is their families. This is their life.
What was the most serious injury you saw with some of the children?
So it's interesting, that's an interesting question, because the severity of injuries. So perhaps people would think the most severe injury would be something going to your brain, where a child is no longer able to think or reason or speak or play, and that's a horrible, devastating injury. And we, of course, saw those children with brain injuries who will never be the same again.
Yeah,
never. But I think the amputations are the ones that, one particular amputation where a boy lost both of his arms. Both of his arms are gone. So he has no arms. He was born a typical child. He was a normal, ordinary 9-year-old boy. So, you think, so now you're going to live a whole life. And his brain is fine. His legs are fine. His body's whole. He's going to live a whole life with no arms. And, for no reason. For no reason. So, and I could go on and on about which was the worst. I don't know. They're all horrible.
So when you say that they arrived, it wasn't a case of, okay, he still had his limbs and you had to amputate. He arrived like that.
Yeah, in war trauma medicine, we've learned a lot. And one of the things that happens in war medicine is that they quickly try to save the life. Okay. So whereas, if you were in Qatar and you were in a car crash and your arm got injured, we would spend a lot of time trying to save that arm, right? Because it's a calm time. We have ICUs and sanitation and antibiotics and all that stuff. In a war zone, you are trying to save lives. So I think limb loss is something that becomes, listen, we need to save the life. Yeah. This limb is infected. This person is bleeding. We've got to just get to it. One of the things that was also something I did not expect was the incredible pain so many of these children were in, because there's something called shrapnel. Shrapnel is the bits of metal and rocks and stones that blow with the blast and get embedded in the body. So bits and pieces of metal and other things get embedded in these children's bodies, and they might sit next to a nerve and just constantly hit that nerve. So many of the children were in excruciating pain. And that was something I had never dealt with either, that degree of just that you're trying to think of, can we go in and get this piece of metal out? Can we safely pull it out so it stops stimulating the nerve and hurting the child? And sometimes we couldn't. And so the children live in pain. So we use, medications to try to limit it. Sometimes over time, maybe the shrapnel would shift a little bit and maybe it wouldn't cause as much pain. But things like that where that was a surprise to me. It's so obvious now that I've lived through it. But so many of the children were in so much pain. And maybe their bodies were fine, but they'd wake up and go to sleep in pain.
You said that many of these children have lost parents and family members. How many of the children that you treated had lost a parent?
The vast majority of them had lost at least one parent. Mm-hmm. Many of them had lost both parents. I remember the boy I told you about who lost his arms. When I went in that room, his mother was there. His siblings were there. And it was such a joyful thing to see an intact family. The father was not there. But the mom had her children, and that was all her children. They all had survived. They had all come out of Gaza. And that was such a heartwarming moment to see a family of 4. We weren't seeing that. We were seeing a grandfather with the 2-year-old who was his favorite grandson and the only survivor of 25 family members. That was typical.
That young boy, how is he doing now?
Well, kids are survivors. It's just really remarkable. It's one of the reasons I love working with children, because children are resilient and creative. So he uses his feet. He uses his feet. He can feed himself, and you can learn to write with your toes. And there are many things he can do. There are things he cannot do and never will be able to do,
like
toileting. How does one clean oneself? Right? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. Buttoning a shirt becomes difficult. There are many things we can teach them to do in rehabilitation, using external things to put on shirts and things like that. So we can teach them how to live a relatively independent life. And these days with technology, with voice-activated technology, there are a lot of things that can be done for him. And so technology helps a lot. But kids, his mom and siblings are with him, right? Yeah. His family came with him. So he has the love and support that lead to resilience and lead to strength.
We talked about amputations and shrapnel. What are the other common injuries that the children have coming from Gaza?
Well, we've had several kids that are paralyzed, that are in wheelchairs now and will be. A couple of gunshot wounds to the back that led to an injury that paralyzed the legs. One girl had piece of shrapnel that entered her brain and severed the visual nerve to her eye. So she's blind in one eye, but also weak on one side of her body because of where the shrapnel hit. Every single child has a devastating injury. That's why they were brought, They had survived, and they really needed the high level of care that could be provided here. Every single one had some devastating injury.
The children that come in, we've spoken about the physical injuries. How do you help these children deal with their trauma?
We have a great child and adolescent mental health staff at Sidra, and they have caught these children and have tried to help them deal with their trauma. This is probably a lifelong mental health issue. That I think that they can put it away at this age, but children are growing and developing, and
they can compartmentalize and just
and then maybe it comes back up at different times in life. Mm-hmm. So I think that it will be a long process for most of them to adjust to what's happened. I'm a mother, so I look at my children, and I look at what these kids have gone through, 9, 10, 11 years old, and they're so composed and so capable, and it's really just amazing how mature these kids are. There's one boy who, he's 12 or 13. He came here, he had nobody with him. No family. I can't remember why, because he did have a family member back in Gaza. He would talk to them on the phone, but he's here alone, and he might be 14. And he developed a friendship with one of our therapists who has become like his sister. Oh. It's amazing. And she's with him at every appointment. Mm. And she says they talk every day. And so, you see these relationships develop also that are natural and beautiful and that help these children survive as well. So this young man who came here alone now has family in Qatar.
I don't think people understand what these children have gone through, what they're going through. How do you get them back to being just kids?
Oh, you can't. You can't, right? I mean, they've seen too much. But the babies, the 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds, those are the ones that are just like, they seem untouched. Even they have a prosthesis or they don't have a prosthesis and they're moving around without it and they're getting back to play and they're joyful and friendly and lovely and out of pain. And, we've seen them change so much because when they arrived, they were in so much pain and they were afraid. And now they come to the hospital and they're not afraid and they're friendly and they're playful. And, the younger ones, they're doing really, really well. The older kids, it just depends. Some of them are in psychotherapy, for adjustment, et cetera. But they've survived. And I believe that they will thrive.
It's uncomfortable to hear, and it hurts to hear what these children are going through. But it's a conversation that needs to be had.
We're grateful to be here and to be able to provide this service for them. It's why we get up in the morning, and we feel very privileged to have been even a small part of their survival.
Dr. Lisa, thank you. And not just for being here, but for the work that you're doing and that you continue to do.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I hope this episode of Now You Know has offered a glimpse into the compassion and dedication of the doctors caring for these children and what the long, complex path to recovery for them involves. A huge thank you to Dr. Lisa Thornton for joining me today, and a special thanks to you for watching and listening to Now You Know.